Quite some time ago, I was a member of the VYou community, and that was a social network that was very experimental. And what they were all about was creating 2 minute or shorter video responses to questions and comments that would come from other VYousers or from the outside. And because I had a web presence already, I started getting a lot of questions about various different issues. Some about ethics, some about philosophy in general, some about politics, some about religion. And I'm now wrapping up with the ones that where I gave some sort of coherent response. I'm not putting all of them in, but some sort of coherent or interesting response to questions about religion. And so a lot of these tend to focus on matters like arguments for God's existence, what do you think about heaven and hell, atheism, Satanists, things like that. The questions would come from all sorts of quarters, so they were a little bit unpredictable, and my answers depended very much on how I was feeling that day and what I wanted to say. So here are 10 more, and these are the last of the religion-oriented videos. 10 more very short clips answering questions about religion.
Well, this is a good question. If you don't sin, does this mean Jesus died for nothing? Now, if you mean you, as in Greg Sadler, me, it's not an issue because I sin, and I sin plenty, and I'll bet you that I'll be, doing some things wrong till I die. Hopefully they're going to be pretty minor things, but I know myself well enough to think that there's never any possibility that I'm not going to be doing something wrong. Does this mean Jesus died for nothing? Let's say we take a hypothetical, and then you've got some sinless person who would be asking this question. That means they never sin, right? They not only haven't committed sins, they're not committing sins, they won't be committing sins. Let's assume that leap is possible, right? Does that mean Jesus died for nothing? No, because there's 6 billion other people in the world, and all these other people, in the past, and all these other people coming in the future. It's not as if Jesus only died for one person and that's it. If you happen to be so good that you never sin, well, then I guess he didn't die for you, right? But he certainly did for me and for everybody else, and so we'll take it. If you don't need it, we'll use it, right? So yeah, there's the answer. It's kind of a good question though, because it sets up a really interesting hypothetical possibility. Let's say Adam and Eve had never sinned. How would things have gone then? There wouldn't have been any need for redemption. Maybe they would have been confirmed in their justice the way the angels who didn't fall were. That'd be an interesting possibility, and it's discussed by some theologians, and I don't really remember the discussions because I didn't pay very close attention to them. Okay, so you've asked me two really big, involved questions, and I'm not a theologian. I'm a philosopher whose work sometimes goes into theology, and who, as a Catholic philosopher, whose work is informed to some degree by the broad theological tradition. I'll answer the first question, and if you want to ask me the second question as a separate question, I can do that, but we only get a certain amount of time. So I'm going to read you something actually from the life of St. Anselm, which is really startling. So Anselm would say that if he should see before his very eyes the horror of sin on the one hand and the pains of hell on the other, and was obliged to plunge into one or the other, he would choose hell rather than sin. And he was in the habit of saying something else, which perhaps appeared to some people no less remarkable, that he would prefer to be free from sin and go to hell innocently than go to the kingdom of heaven polluted with the stain of sin. Since this saying seems strange to some people, he explained and softened it, saying, "It's certain that only the wicked are tormented in hell, and only the good are happy in the kingdom of heaven. Therefore it's clear that the good, if they could enter hell, could not be visited with punishment due to the wicked, nor could the evil, if they could get to heaven, enjoy there the blessedness of the good. And that's a really interesting way of thinking about things. I mean, it's very Augustinian, this idea that heaven and hell are not sort of external places that you get thrown into, but rather have to do with the state of the person. And actually, you find that in Plato too. You find that in quite a few philosophers, even before the Christian era. So, those are just a few of my thoughts on heaven and hell. I mean, you asked me a big question that I can't answer in just a few short moments. But I think that's a good story, though, and I think it does illustrate an interesting point. Well, let me say first that I really like the idea of atheists finding themselves in a place that they then claim, well, I don't believe in this. Well, when you get there, buddy, tough shit, right? You're stuck. So if the theists are right and their conception of the good place, the bad place, whether it's a final resting place or not, because there are some metaphysical schemes in which there are different layers and all sorts of complexities to it. But if they're right that there is a final judgment, and atheists wind up going one way or the other, I kind of get a kick out of the idea of them saying, oh, but I don't believe in this. Well, it doesn't matter what you believe sometimes. It matters what is. And the key is to align your beliefs with what is. Now, the theological question of atheists going to heaven or hell, it's not something that you can answer carte blanche, I think. Although I think a lot of people would say that automatically atheists are going to go to hell. Here's my view, and it's derived from the fact that I'm a Catholic philosopher, and there's a lot of discussion of this in Catholic and Eastern Orthodox thought. Is it possible that an atheist could go to heaven through God's mercy because they are not, choosing their atheism per se? Like, consider somebody brought up in a communist country where the church had been effectively wiped out, or where the church had given so much scandal that it was very difficult to believe. Could that person go to heaven? I don't see why not. I mean, if God chooses to extend his mercy in that way, that doesn't seem unreasonable to me at all. Will somebody who's willfully choosing atheism go to hell? I think it's likely, although I also think that a lot of people who are practicing religion are likely to go to hell too. And I'm very concerned that I don't go there. So. Well, do I believe in luck, good or bad? Yes. I'm not sure. It says I've asked many religious here, and I still can't believe their answers. So I'm guessing that you're not happy with the answers that they gave, and you might not be happy with the answer that I gave. Do I believe in anything like pure chance? No. I believe that luck is where different things come together, and like Aristotle says, that which is done by chance is actually where there's a lot of different causes coming together that we don't fully understand. So I don't see luck as actually something that is totally incompatible with the notion, which is something that I also hold, that everything is also part of one big, massive, comprehensive, very flexible, providential ordering of things. So flexible that it can even take into account human free will and the effects of human free will on further free willing. I believe that's actually part of the providential ordering. So yeah, I do believe in something like luck. And I don't actually place a great premium on it. I think when I was younger, I was much more interested in luck. Now I think about, what do I need to do in this situation? How do I prepare for things? And yeah, this is something I need to think more about, though. So I don't actually have, at this point, I'm sort of running out of answers, which is kind of interesting. So I'm going to cut it short here. Okay, so this looks to me like a question that would be good for Dr. Sadler's Chalk and Talk, because it deserves much longer than 2 minutes. I'll give you a very short answer to this, and then I'll tell you kind of a funny story. So, short answer, why does God want people to believe in Him and then give such minimal evidence to His existence? It really depends on what you count as evidence. There's many different modes of evidence. If you mean something that's sort of like publicly accessible and convincing with no interpretation required to everybody, then yeah, you're right. Not a lot of evidence in that sense. But is that what we actually mean by evidence when we're talking about personal beings or about, say the order of providence or things along those lines? Well, then we get into all different modes of evidence, and that's a complicated issue, so I'm going to defer that. So here's the funny story. When I was in high school, and this is a Catholic high school, I took a philosophy class, and I, as in most of my classes, I screwed off a lot and didn't apply myself, but I was smart, so I could kind of get away with it. And on one of the tests, one of the things we've been talking about is this, arguments for God's existence and evidence and all that. And on the test, we had an essay question, and it ran something like, if you were God, would you have made your existence easy or difficult to prove? And so I wrote, I would have made it very, very difficult to prove, and I would have killed anybody with a lightning bolt who came close to discovering the proof. Why? Because that would keep the whole process going for all eternity. It's a sort of typical thing a smart-ass teenager says. I got an F on that test because that was not the right answer. So you've watched some of my videos regarding my faith. I'm guessing that must just be VYou stuff because I haven't really done anything on YouTube with that. And you're wondering whether I've read the God Delusion. No, I haven't read it. I've just read glosses on it, but from the glosses it's not really doing anything radically new, and these questions have been discussed for a very long time from a lot of different perspectives by very smart people. I don't think that it adds anything new to the discussion. It just keeps it going on, and that's fine. How do I specifically refute the claims? I don't. I leave that up to other people. I have so many other projects going on right now that I don't worry about Dawkins and his stuff. I've got my classes to run. Personally, my faith life doesn't depend on anything on what Richard Dawkins thinks, and I'm not bothered in the least, nor are I think most believers by the fact that some other people don't believe, are very vehemently opposed to belief, and bring out all sorts of arguments against it. It's a question of whether you find those arguments convincing or not. So, I would much rather read great philosophers. If I want to have an atheist interlocutor, I'd much rather read a great philosopher, or just read stuff, like Dostoevsky's characters, some of them who are atheists, and make some amazing arguments against God. I'd much rather engage that sort of stuff. I find that more fruitful. So. What do I say to the various invisible gardener arguments that get started by John Wisdom, who, by the way, I very much like as a philosopher? I don't say anything to them because I haven't really looked at them for a few years, and I never found them particularly interesting anyway. I've never really found, from a philosophical perspective, all these debates that took place in Anglo-American philosophy about verification and whether it consisted in falsifiability or all this sort of stuff. I never found that very interesting. It didn't tell me anything about what I wanted to know about in philosophy of religion. And really what counts as verification, it ends up being such an easily shifting boundary line, not only for the theists who can always say, oh, well, I didn't mean that, I didn't mean that, I didn't mean that, but also for the other side, the agnostics or skeptics or atheists who can say, oh, that doesn't count, that doesn't count, that doesn't count. I've never been very interested myself in this idea of having to prove God's existence to the non-believer. I'm always much more interested in if we're talking about philosophy of religion, in conceptions of God, and so less in existence and more in the divine attributes and interactions with creation, and then what would that mean concretely? And I'm interested in religious experience as well. And if you start bringing in these verificationist arguments to religious experience, well, it all just disappears. But that seems to me just silly. There's something there. We don't want to just dismiss it all out of hand. And so, Invisible Gardener, I don't really do much with it. I think that the time for that is kind of past. Well, quite simply, I don't think God does care more about America than he does any third world country. I could be wrong on that. I don't know the mind of God, but I don't see any evidence that God cares more about us in the sense of caring more for us than he does third world countries. I think he might care more about us in that he thinks we'd be more culpable because we have a hell of a lot more opportunities to do the right thing. And anybody who wants access to learning about the right thing has innumerable opportunities to do so in this country. We have open access to all sorts of knowledge, whether through the internet, through libraries, through people willing to reach out to you. So if anybody wants to know what reason dictates or conscience dictates, or about religious teachings or anything like that, if they wanted to really grasp what God is asking them to do, what God's will is, they can they can figure it out if they want to. I don't think most people want to, or they would very much like it to be what they would like it to be, wouldn't they? Yeah, and I'm not saying that I'm above that myself, because I find myself often questioning what I've made of things. But now here's the interesting thing. A lot of people do think that God cares more about America, that we're somehow special. That's called American exceptionalism. And it goes all the way back to some of our cultural foundings in the Pilgrims and some other Protestant denominations that come over. John Winthrop, he's got this trope of a city on a hill, which is coming from the Bible. And the notion is America, or at least the fledgling colony, is a city on the hill. Well, that means not only you're a model, but that means that you better get it right, or you're going to get in trouble, just like Israel does in the Bible over and over again. They get it wrong, and then God's mad. Okay, my feelings on Satanism. I don't think you can actually say they even rise to the level of feelings. It's not something I've actually thought about for quite a while. I used to teach religious studies classes for Ball State College at Indiana State Prison, and we'd talk about it there. Towards the end of the semester, in Religion and American Culture is one of the alternative religious movements, along with some other things along those lines. I can tell you that when I was a kid, growing up in the 80s, wearing a leather jacket, and having longer hair than this, and listening to a lot of heavy metal music, we had people who thought we were Satanists. And when I brought home Ronnie James Dio's Holy Diver album, my mom was very concerned, because it shows this big satanic figure throwing a priest into a pool. I gotta say, I've dealt with some students who at least claim to be Satanists. Some of them, I believe, are actually quite hardcore about it. And I've had some associates in other places. I find them kind of tame. I think the devil's a much more interesting figure in Jewish, Christian, Islamic, Zoroastrian literature than he is in the literature of the Satanists, unfortunately. There's something about turning him or it into an object of worship that, I don't know, kind of trivializes the stuff. And there's a show I like called Metapocalypse. They have this band, Death Clock. They're very metal, and they decide they're going to become Satanists. They become very disappointed when they join the church, and they find out it's actually quite tame. That's actually been my experience with a lot of Satanists, and I think Satanism kind of tends towards that. There's. Well, I was actually near the end of what I was saying when I got slightly cut off. I didn't have much more to add to it, but your question opens up some new things that I could talk about. And here's a side note. If you keep on asking me questions, I can go on for hours and hours talking about all sorts of things, because my head is kind of crammed full like a dusty attic full of bits of trivia about things or things I thought about in the past, and then they come to light. So what about the idea of not denying earthly pleasure and urges? Yeah, actually, I'm quite in favor of earthly pleasure and urges within certain limits, and any rational being can't totally indulge themselves in any particular urge or earthly pleasure, or else it leads to catastrophic effects. I mean, it feels good to sleep, but you can't sleep all day long. And it feels good to have sex, but you can't do that all day long, and you can't drink all the time or eat all the time. You can try. As a matter of fact, back when I was in graduate school, I did an experiment with a friend of mine. We decided we were going to just drink for an entire week, and that's all we were going to do. And we made it to about day 5, and we felt so terrible that we had to discontinue the experiment. And actually, it's interesting. A lot of people think that religion is about denying earthly pleasure and urges. Properly understood, if you look at any of the great world religious traditions, well, I have to qualify. Jainism, okay, if you actually read the texts, big time asceticism. But most of them don't actually devalue pleasure and urges. They just place it within a larger context. So